They called it the end of all things, a gravity anchor. A collapsing point in space where matter screams, where light itself cannot escape, where entire dreadnoughts vanish like paper thrown into a furnace. Every civilization in the known galaxy had one rule burned into their survival code: run. But humanity looked into that collapsing abyss, felt the crushing pull of a dying star's last breath, and said, "Hold position. If you think that's insane, wait until you hear what they did next." Welcome to HFY Endurance Tales. Hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment, because this story is about to change the way you think about what it means to be human. Now, let's anchor in. The Kethvoran High Command had never lost a battle near a gravity anchor. They didn't need to. Nobody fought near one. That was the point. The gravity anchor, classified in the Galactic Scientific Registry as a Class Omega Singularity event, was not a weapon. It was not a battlefield hazard. It was not even a phenomenon that required military doctrine. It was simply the end. A naturally occurring collapse of a dying stellar body into a localized point of zero volume, where gravitational force exceeded every known physical constant, where the laws that governed the universe bent like steel girders under a mountain's weight and then snapped entirely. The Kethvoran had a word for it in their language. It translated roughly to the mouth of nothing. They had records stretching back 4,000 years of species that had failed to evacuate in time. Ancient empires, proud militaries. Entire colonial fleets, all gone, not destroyed in battle, not defeated by strategy. Simply consumed, pulled apart at the molecular level by a force so absolute it registered not as violence, but as physics. The Vorthali Collective had lost an entire exploration wing to 1-3. Centuries ago, 12 ships gone in 11 seconds, they had erected a monument near the coordinates, a warning beacon broadcasting on every frequency in the known galaxy. Do not approach, do not linger. Do not attempt recovery operations. The Vorthali were not a species given to fear. But that monument had never been taken down. The Syndicate of Creel had actually sent a research drone once. An unmanned probe, hardened against radiation, reinforced against pressure, built by their finest engineers. It had survived approximately 43 seconds inside the crush zone before its last telemetry signal had dissolved into static. The data it returned in those 43 seconds had terrified every physicist in the Syndicate for a generation. So when the Interstellar Compact, the governing body of 41 spacefaring civilizations, drew up its unified military code, the section regarding gravity anchors was exactly one sentence long. All vessels, military or otherwise, are to maintain a minimum safe distance of 12 astronomical units from any confirmed or suspected Class Omega Singularity event, and are to initiate emergency withdrawal protocols immediately upon detection. One sentence. Because that was all it needed, nobody argued. Nobody lobbied for an amendment. Nobody suggested that perhaps the distance should be 10 AU instead of 12, or that perhaps some specialized vessels might be exempt. The rule passed unanimously. Every species signed it. Even the Drathiel, who had never agreed on anything in recorded history, signed it without debate, and then humanity arrived on the galactic stage. Commander Dale Harris remembered the exact moment his crew first encountered a gravity anchor. Not because it was terrifying, though it was. Not because half his crew had gone pale and silent when the proximity alert screamed across the bridge of the UES Relentless, though they had. He remembered it because of what his chief engineer, a hard-jawed man named Frank Weston, had said when the readings came through. Frank had stared at the data. He had stared for a long time. Then he had looked up from his console and said, very quietly, "Commander, you know what this thing reminds me of?" Dale had said nothing. He had waited. "It reminds me of the Colorado River," Frank had said, "before we learned to dam it." That was 3 years ago. Dale was thinking about that line now, standing on the bridge of the Relentless as the Kethvoran fleet, 47 warships, each one larger than a city block, bristling with weapons that could crack a moon, moved into formation on the other side of the anchor. They thought they were safe over there. They thought the anchor was a wall between them and the human fleet. They thought humanity would do what every other species did. They thought humanity would run. Tactical Officer Lieutenant Greg Saunders turned from his station. His voice was level, professional, the way it always was before something insane happened. "Commander, the Kethvoran flagship is hailing us. Admiral Vethkara is demanding we withdraw from the sector. He's citing the Compact Military Code, Section 14. Dale looked at the anchor on the display. A dark, swirling absence where light bent and died, 12 astronomical units away. Every instrument on the ship was screaming. The hull was already groaning under the distant pull, a low, almost musical vibration running through the titanium composite frame of the Relentless like a bass note from the universe itself. He looked at Frank, who was already at his inertial dampener console. Fingers moving across the controls with the calm focus of a man who had done this before. Because Frank had done this before, they all had. "Tell Admiral Vethkara," Dale said, "that we appreciate his concern." Saunders raised an eyebrow. And tell him we're staying put." The silence on the bridge lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then Frank Weston smiled, the slow, dangerous smile of a man who had looked into the abyss and started taking notes, and said, "Dampeners at full. Void lock sequence in 30 seconds, Commander." Across the void, 47 Kethvoran warships watched in absolute disbelief as the human fleet stopped running and turned toward the collapsing star. No species survived the gravity anchor, but humanity had never been particularly interested in survival alone. They were interested in what came after, and what came after was about to rewrite every military doctrine in the known galaxy. The Kethvoran had excellent sensors. That was in many ways their greatest military asset. Where other species relied on intuition or tactical doctrine, the Kethvoran relied on data. Their sensor arrays could detect the thermal signature of a single power cell at 30 AU. Their targeting systems could track a vessel through a debris field at 0.3 light speed. Their admirals were trained from birth to read a battlefield the way a musician reads sheet music. Every variable accounted for, every probability calculated. Every outcome modeled before the first shot was ever fired. So when Admiral Vethkara watched the human fleet execute, what his sensors were telling him was a controlled deceleration toward the gravity. Anchor's crush zone. His first instinct was equipment malfunction. He ran the diagnostic twice. The sensors were fine. His second instinct was that the humans were panicking, that their engines had failed, that they were being pulled in despite themselves, a catastrophic accident playing out in real time. He ran the trajectory analysis. The humans were not being pulled, they were maneuvering. Deliberately, with precision. His third instinct, the one he would never admit to in any official report, was something that had no clinical name in Kethvoran strategic science. It was the instinct that crept into the base of his mind like cold liquid, slow, spreading, impossible to ignore. It was dread. "They're void-locking," said his science officer, Subcommander Rethavel, and his voice had the particular flatness of someone reciting a fact they did not entirely believe. "Commander, their engine output is matching the gravitational pull at the boundary layer. They're not fighting the anchor, they're balancing against it." Kara stared at his display. "That's not possible. I know, no species has ever. I know, Admiral." The silence on the Kethvoran flagship stretched long and uncomfortable on the other side of the anchor. Dale Harris stood at the center of the Relentless bridge and felt the ship settle. That was the only word for it, settle, the way a deep-sea vessel settles when its anchor catches the ocean floor. The groaning in the hull dropped from a high-tension whine to a low, steady hum. The instrument stopped screaming. The inertial dampeners, running at 112% of standard capacity, had caught the pull and distributed it across the entire hull matrix, converting raw gravitational force into manageable structural load. "Void lock confirmed," Frank Weston said, and there was something almost reverent in his voice. "We're stable, Commander. All 7 ships holding position at 4.8 AU from the singularity boundary. 4.8 AU. More than 7 AU, inside the compact military code's minimum safe distance. In the crush zone that had swallowed Vorthali exploration wings and reduced Creel research drones to static in 43 seconds. And they were stable. Dale walked to the forward display. He looked at the anchor, really looked at it. Up close within the crush zone, it was not the dark, featureless void it appeared to be at safe distance. There was structure to it, texture. The accretion disk surrounding the singularity moved in slow, terrible spirals of superheated plasma, casting light that was wrong, light that bent and curved as it tried to escape, painting the surrounding space in shifting curtains of red and gold and deep violet. It was the most dangerous place in this sector of the galaxy. It was also, Dale thought, the most defensible. "Saunders," he said. "What's the Kethvoran fleet doing?" "Holding position at 14 AU, sir. They haven't moved. I'm reading elevated communication traffic between their ships." A pause. "They're confused, Commander. Their formation's gone loose. They're not in attack posture. They're in, I don't know what to call it, observation posture. They're watching us." "Yes, sir," Dale nodded. That was fine. He wanted them watching. 3 months ago, in a secure briefing room at Earth Strategic Command, General Patricia Holt, the architect of the entire Gravity Anchor tactical program, had laid out the philosophy behind what they were doing with a clarity that Dale still thought about. Regularly, every other species in this galaxy, she had said, has built their military doctrine around the assumption that the universe is an enemy. That space is hostile. That physics is something to be survived, endured, managed. And they're not wrong, but they've made one critical error. They've assumed that what applies to them applies to everyone. She had pulled up the data on human inertial dampener development. 40 years of research. A technology that had started as a solution to the brutal acceleration forces of early human deep space travel. The kind of G-forces that had killed test pilots and turned long-duration missions into medical disasters and had evolved, iteration by iteration, into something no other species had prioritized, because no other species had needed it the way humanity did. "We didn't build these systems to fight," Holt had said. "We built them to survive our own ambition." But ambition has a way of repurposing tools. The first time a human pilot had tested void locking, balancing engine thrust against gravitational pull at the boundary of a Class 3 singularity. The weakest anchor class on record, the test had lasted 4 minutes. The pilot, a lieutenant commander named James Briggs, had described the experience afterward in terms that had become famous at Strategic Command. "It's like riding a river," Briggs had said. "You don't fight the current, you read it. And then you find the still water underneath." 4 minutes had become 4 hours. 4 hours had become indefinite. By the time Strategic Command had deployed the Voidlock program operationally, human pilots could hold position at the boundary of a Class 5 anchor, the second most powerful category on record, for as long as their fuel and supplies allowed. The Kethvoran were looking at a Class 6, Commander, said Frank, without looking up from his console. "I'm reading a Kethvoran scout vessel breaking from the main formation. Small ship, probably sensor-enhanced. They're moving toward the 14U boundary line. They want a closer look." "Yes, sir, they won't get much closer than that, though. Their hull tolerances won't handle the tidal forces past 12O. Dale turned from the display. "Let them look." In fact, he paused, working through the thought, open a channel to Admiral Vethkara. Saunders looked up. "Sir, open the channel, Lieutenant." A moment later, the Kethvoran Admiral's face filled the forward display. Vethkara was old by Kethvoran standards, the dark, segmented plates of his species' natural armor showing the deep weathering of age. His secondary eyes, half closed in the expression that Dale had learned from intelligence briefings, indicated deep calculation. He looked at Dale the way a man looks at something that should not exist. "Commander Harris," Vethkara said. His translator rendered the words in flat, precise English. "You are in the crush zone of a Class 6 singularity event." "I am," Dale agreed. "No vessel can maintain structural integrity at that range. And yet," a pause. "What are you doing, Commander?" Dale let the question sit for a moment. Behind him, he could hear the low hum of the Relentless holding its impossible position. The sound of human engineering doing something the galaxy had declared impossible, calmly, without drama. As if it were simply the next logical step. "Admiral," Dale said, "we're setting up a defensive perimeter." The silence that followed was the most satisfying thing Dale Harris had ever heard. And somewhere in the Kethvoran fleet's sensor logs, An algorithm that had been designed to model every possible human tactical response quietly flagged an error it could not categorize, because the scenario it was now processing had never been entered into any database in galactic history. The database had no entry for humans using a collapsing star as a fortification. It was about to get a new one. The Kethvoran War Council met for 6 hours. Dale knew this because Saunders was monitoring their communication frequencies. And the volume of encrypted traffic coming from the Kethvoran flagship told its own story. 6 hours of deliberation. 6 hours of admirals and strategists and physicists locked in a room, looking at data their models couldn't process, arguing about a situation their doctrine hadn't anticipated. 6 hours. And they hadn't moved. That was the first victory. Not a shot fired, not a ship lost. The human fleet, anchored to the void at the edge of a collapsing star, had paralyzed a 47-ship battle group simply by being somewhere they weren't supposed to be. Dale used the 6 hours productively. "Walk me through the chain deployment again," he said, standing at the tactical table with Frank Weston and his weapons officer, Captain Roy Callahan, a broad-shouldered man from Montana who had the unsettling habit of treating the most dangerous tactical situations with the same calm focus he applied to routine maintenance. Checks. Roy pulled up the schematic on the table's display. "Anchor chain is a tethered gravitational pulse system," he said. "We fire a probe, hardened, disposable, toward a target vessel. The probe locks onto the target's hull signature using a magnetic torsion anchor. Once locked, it activates a localized gravitational intensifier, not strong enough to do damage on its own, but strong enough to establish a pull vector. And then we use the gravity anchor to amplify that vector," Dale said. "Exactly. We're not generating the force ourselves. We're redirecting existing gravitational pull from the singularity through the chain connection. The target vessel gets a direct line of force from a Class 6 anchor pulling at whatever angle we set when we lock the probe." Frank made a sound that was halfway between admiration and unease. "We're using the star's own death as a weapons delivery system." "Yes," Roy said without any particular emotion. "That's the general idea." Dale looked at the schematic. The concept was elegant in the way that the most dangerous ideas always were, simple in principle, terrifying in execution. A conventional weapon required energy generation, targeting systems, projectile or beam delivery. The anchor chain required only a probe, a lock, and the universe's most powerful natural force. Already present and already pulling, the challenge had been engineering the probe to survive the crush zone long enough to reach a target at 12 or 14 AU, the range where enemy vessels would be operating. That had taken Frank's team 2 years and 4 destroyed prototypes. The 5th prototype had survived the crush zone transit, locked onto a decommissioned target hulk at 13 AU, and pulled it into the Singularity's accretion disk in under 3 minutes. The test footage had made the rounds at Strategic Command in silence. Nobody had cheered. Not because it wasn't impressive, but because watching a ship, even an empty, decommissioned hulk, get dragged inexorably toward a collapsing star while its structure failed piece by piece was not something that inspired celebration. It inspired a long, careful quietness, the kind that came when human beings fully understood what they had built. General Holt had watched the footage twice. Then she had approved the program for operational deployment. "Probe inventory?" Dale asked. 42 functional units across the fleet," Roy said. 7 reserved for defensive anchoring. 35 available for offensive deployment. 35 against 47 Kethvoran ships, not a one-to-one solution. But the anchor chain was not a guaranteed kill, it was a guaranteed problem. A ship hit by an anchor chain didn't die instantly. It had choices. It could fight the pull with engine power, which required enormous fuel expenditure and would quickly degrade its combat effectiveness. It could attempt to disconnect the probe, which required external hull operations under extreme gravitational stress, essentially impossible in a combat environment. Or it could surrender in testing. Simulated enemy crews had chosen surrender in approximately 80% of cases once they understood what was pulling them. The other 20% had run out of fuel. "Commander," Saunders' voice. Cut across the tactical table. Kethvoran fleet is moving. Dale looked up. Formation? Attack formation, sir, but they're not advancing toward us. They're spreading laterally, trying to flank the anchor. Get around us? Dale felt something sharpen in his thinking, the particular focus that came when a situation moved from preparation to reality. They're trying to get behind us. Find a firing angle that doesn't require them to approach the crush zone. Yes, sir. If they can get around the anchor's perimeter, they can engage us from the safe distance side. How long until they complete the maneuver? At their current speed, 40 minutes. 40 minutes. Dale looked at Frank. Frank was already calculating. If they flank us, Frank said, we lose the anchor as a barrier. We're exposed on the far side. Our hull can handle the crush zone on one vector, but if we're taking fire from the opposite direction simultaneously, we can't fight on two fronts while void locked, Dale finished. I know, he straightened up. So we don't let them complete the maneuver. Roy looked at him. Sir, if we leave the void lock to pursue, we're not pursuing. Dale turned to Saunders. Get me a firing solution on the 3 lead Kethvoran vessels in the flanking formation. Probe deployment, anchor chain attachment. I want to show Admiral Vethkara something before he finishes that maneuver. The bridge went quiet, not the quiet of hesitation. The quiet of people who understood what was coming and were making their peace with it. Roy Callahan ran his targeting sequence with the same focused calm he brought to everything. His hands moved across the weapons console without hurry. Firing solution ready, Commander. 3 lead vessels. Chains will lock within 90 seconds of probe deployment. Comms, Dale said. Get me Admiral Vethkara. The Kethvoran Admiral appeared on the display again. This time his secondary eyes were fully open. He had been watching the human fleet, Dale realized. Watching very carefully, Admiral, Dale said. I'd like to give you an opportunity to reconsider your flanking maneuver. Vethkara's translated voice was precise. You cannot stop us from repositioning, Commander. You are anchored to the singularity. You cannot pursue. No, Dale agreed. We can't pursue, he paused. But your 3 lead ships are currently at 13.2 AU from the singularity boundary. That's well within probe range, Admiral. Silence. I'd recommend halting your formation, Dale said very calmly. Before I demonstrate what happens to a ship at 13 AU when it gets anchor chained to a Class 6 singularity. The Kethvoran formation did not halt immediately. But it slowed. And in that slowing, in the hesitation of 47 warships commanded by admirals who had run every tactical model in their database and found no entry for this, Dale heard something he hadn't expected. He heard the first real crack in their certainty. It was not over. Not even close. But the Kethvoran had just learned something that no species in galactic history had ever been forced to learn before, that the most dangerous place in the sector was not the gravity anchor. Itself, it was the humans sitting inside it. The Kethvoran formation held for 11 minutes. Then Admiral Vethkara made his decision, and Dale respected it, not because it was wise, but because it was brave. Vethkara had not built a 40-year military career by backing down. He had built it by finding solutions to problems that had no solutions. And so, faced with a human fleet, anchored to an anchor that should have been impassable, Vethkara did what great commanders do when the conventional playbook runs out. He improvised. He's splitting the formation, Saunders reported, voice tight. Not a flanking maneuver anymore. They're dividing into 3 groups. One group directly ahead at 14 AU, maintaining position. Second group moving to our port, far side of the anchor perimeter. Third group, a pause. Third group is pulling back, withdrawing. Dale frowned. Withdrawing to 22 AU, sir. They're out of probe range at that distance. Frank was already working the numbers. It's a compression play, he said. One group holds our attention at the front. One group pressures our flank from the port side, just inside their combat range, just outside the crush zone where our advantage is greatest. And the third group holds at long range, keeps us from repositioning freely. It's a classic Kethvoran envelopment strategy. Adapted for a situation they've never trained for. They're good, Roy said. It was not a compliment he gave often. Dale studied the tactical display. The Kethvoran were not trying to enter the crush zone. They were trying to compress the human fleet's freedom of movement until one of 2 things happened. Either the humans abandoned the void lock to respond to the pressure, surrendering their defensive position, or they stayed void-locked and absorbed fire from 3 vectors simultaneously. It was a good plan. In almost any other tactical context, it would have been a decisive plan. "Roy," Dale said, "port group distance?" 11.6 AU, sir, moving. They're going to settle at around 10.8 if they continue their current approach vector. 10.8 AU. Still outside the crush zone's most extreme tidal effects. Still inside probe range. How many ships in the port group? 14, Commander. Dale looked at Frank. If we extend the void lock to cover a repositioning burn, lateral movement, not withdrawal, can we hold structural integrity while we shift our anchor axis? Frank ran the calculation. Dale watched his face, the small, specific expressions of a man doing math that mattered. "Yes," Frank said finally, "but it'll cost us. We'll need to reduce dampener output on the forward vector to cover the lateral movement. We'll be more exposed to the forward group while we shift. How exposed? Their weapons can reach us at 14 AU. We'll be at reduced hull integrity for approximately 4 minutes during the repositioning. 4 minutes under fire from 15 Kethvoran warships." Dale looked at Roy. "What can we put between us and that forward group in 4 minutes? Roy's expression didn't change. 3 probe deployments. I can get chains on their 3 lead vessels. That won't stop their fire, but it'll give them something to think about besides shooting. Do it." Dale turned to Saunders. "All ships, prepare for void lock axis shift. Lateral repositioning, burn on my mark, heading port 15 degrees. We're going to anchor our port flank to a secondary point in the accretion disk." The confirmation signals came back from the 6 other ships of the human fleet, the Ironbridge, the Cascades, the Fort Peck, the Cumberland, the Hoover, the Cooley. Named all of them for dams. Dale had noticed that only recently and had found it appropriate. "Probe deployment," Roy said. 3 away. The probes, small, dense, built to survive environments that would destroy anything larger, streaked out from the Relentless and her sister ships, crossing the distance to the Kethvoran forward group in under 60 seconds. The first probe locked onto the Kethvoran flagship's hull. The second locked onto a heavy cruiser to its port side. The third missed. Its target had maneuvered at the last moment. Some alert sensor officer on the Kethvoran bridge reacting to the incoming track. 2 chains. "Not 3 activating anchor chains," Roy said. "Forward. Full singularity pull." On the tactical display, 2 icons representing Kethvoran vessels began to move, not dramatically, not instantly, but with the slow, inevitable quality of something that could not be argued with. The gravitational pull of the Class 6 anchor, conducted through the chain links, was not a sharp yank. It was a constant, deepening pressure, a pull that grew stronger the longer it ran. As the probe's intensifier cycled up and the chain connection stabilized, the Kethvoran flagship's engines fired at full power. All of them, the energy signature lit up the sensors like a star. Vethkara was fighting the chain with everything he had. It wasn't enough. He was barely holding station. Every unit of engine power he spent fighting the chain was engine power he wasn't spending on combat maneuvers. "Void lock axis shift," Dale said. "Mark!" The Relentless and her fleet moved. Not fast, the void lock was not built for speed. But with purpose, a lateral sweep that repositioned the fleet's anchor point from the Singularity's forward arc to its port arc, putting the ship between the Kethvoran port group and the deepest point of the crush zone. For 4 minutes, the forward group fired. Long-range energy weapons that lost coherence over 14 AU, but still struck with enough force to rattle the hull, overload 2 secondary shield nodes on the Cooley, and blow a coolant line in the Fort Peck's aft section. Damage, real damage, nothing catastrophic but nothing trivial either, and then the repositioning was complete. The void lock axis settled. The fleet's new anchor point held. The port group was now directly ahead and directly in probe range. "Roy," Dale said. "Already on it, Commander." 12 probes deployed in a 6-second burst. The Kethvoran port group scattered, their formation breaking as 14 warship captains realized simultaneously what was about to reach them. But the probes were faster than evasion. And in the scattering, 7 locked, 7 chains. 7 Kethvoran vessels suddenly fighting the pull of a Class 6 gravity anchor with every engine they had. The Kethvoran port group stopped being a combat formation and started being a survival. problem, Admiral Vethkara is hailing us, Saunders said. All frequencies. Dale didn't answer immediately. He looked at the display, at the tactical picture that had transformed in the space of 8 minutes from a three-pronged envelopment into a human fleet, firmly anchored to the most dangerous force in the sector, with 9 Kethvoran vessels on chains and the rest of their formation in disarray. Put him through, Dale said. Vethkara's face appeared. And for the first time in all their communications, the Kethvoran admiral looked like something had shifted behind his eyes. Not defeat, not yet, but the specific expression of a commander who has run out of models and is now operating on instinct alone. Commander Harris, Vethkara said, what is your objective here? What do you want? It was not a question of surrender, not yet. It was a question of understanding. Of a military mind that had built its entire career on the premise that every opponent had a comprehensible goal. Trying to comprehend an opponent who had used a collapsing star as a tactical asset and was currently holding 9 of his ships on gravitational chains, Dale looked at the admiral for a moment. Then he said something that would be quoted in galactic military academies for the next 300 years. Admiral, Dale said, we want you to go home. And we want every species in this galaxy to understand something. He paused. The void is not your ally, it's ours. The channel stayed open for 4 seconds. Then Vethkara closed it, and the Kethvoran third group, the 20 vessels that had been holding at 22 AU, began very slowly to move, not forward, away. The retreat was not a rout. Dale had not expected it to be. Vethkara was too good a commander for a rout. He extracted his forces with the careful precision of someone who understood that a controlled withdrawal preserved more than just ships. It preserved the information those ships carried. The tactical data that would reach Kethvoran High Command and change how every war college in their civilization trained its officers. The 9 chained vessels were the hardest part. Vethkara could not simply leave them. The chains were pulling, and without engine power to fight the gravitational gradient. Those ships would eventually be dragged across the boundary into the accretion disk. It would take time, hours probably, but it would happen. He had a choice. He could abandon them, which was not a choice a Kethvoran admiral made if there was any alternative. Or he could ask for them back. The hail came 40 minutes after the withdrawal began. A different officer this time, a younger face, a sub-commander whose name Dale didn't catch, speaking in the careful, flat tone of someone delivering a message they had been told to deliver exactly as given. Commander Harris. Admiral Vethkara requests the release of tethered vessels in exchange for a formal cessation of hostilities in this sector. Dale looked at Roy, who gave him a small nod. The chains could be released remotely, the probes disengaged by signal. Tell the Admiral, Dale said, that the release of tethered vessels is granted unconditionally. The sub-commander blinked. Unconditionally. Unconditionally, Dale repeated. We don't want his ships, sub-commander. We want his understanding. The chains released. One by one, 9 Kethvoran vessels fired their engines hard, burning through reserves to pull away from the Singularity's pull and rejoined the withdrawing formation. Dale watched them go. Frank came to stand beside him at the forward display, both men watching the Kethvoran fleet recede from the sensors. You know what they're going to do when they get home, Frank said. Tell everyone, Dale said. Tell everyone, Frank agreed. Every species in the compact is going to hear about this within a month, our voidlock protocols, the anchor chains. All of it, that's the point. Frank was quiet for a moment. General Holt's doctrine. Deterrence through demonstration. Exactly. Dale looked at the gravity anchor still there, still pulling. The accretion disk, still burning its slow spiral of superheated matter around the Singularity's horizon. You don't deter people by keeping your capabilities secret, Frank. You deter them by making sure they understand exactly what you can do. And then you give them a way out that lets them walk away with their dignity. Release the chains unconditionally, Frank said, understanding, so they don't have a grudge. So the lesson is the only thing they take home. Right. It was doctrine that had taken human strategists decades to develop, the understanding that the goal of tactical superiority was not to destroy enemies, but to make conflict unprofitable. The Kethvoran would go home, they would report. The galactic community would hear the story of a human fleet that had held position inside a Class 6 gravity anchor's crush zone, deployed anchor chains against a superior force, and then released captured vessels without conditions. And for a long time, perhaps a very long time, no one would want to test what else humanity had learned to do with the void. But the battle at the anchor had not ended without cost. The Fort Peck's coolant line failure had cascaded during the worst of the exchange, a systems problem that spread faster than the damage control teams could isolate it. The ship was still operational, but barely, and Dale had transferred her crew to the Cumberland for the transit home as a precaution. The Cooley's shield nodes were burned out completely. 3 crew members across the fleet had been injured, none fatally, all serious enough to require medical evacuation. Dale visited each of them personally before the fleet began its withdrawal from the crush zone. The last one he visited was a young systems technician named Aaron Webb, 23 years old, from a small town in Idaho that Dale had never heard of. Webb had been at his station on the Hoover during the repositioning burn, running the inertial dampener calibration manually, a task that required continuous physical engagement with the console, when a power surge from a shield overload had traveled back through the circuit and hit the console with enough force to throw him across the compartment. He was sitting up in the medical bay, left arm in a stabilizer brace when Dale came in. "How are you doing, technician?" Dale asked. Webb looked at him with the particular directness of someone who hadn't quite recalibrated yet to the fact that the life-threatening situation was over. "Honestly, Commander, I'm not entirely sure what happened. Power surge, you got thrown, you're going to be fine." "I know, sir." A pause. "Did we hold?" "We held." Webb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My grandfather used to talk about the Colorado River. Said his grandfather told him what it was like before the dams. Said it flooded every spring, tore up farmland, washed out roads. People were scared of it." Another pause, "and then they figured out how to use it." Dale looked at the young technician. Then he looked away at the porthole beside the medical bay bunk, at the distant glow of the gravity anchor, still burning, still pulling, the universe's most powerful death trap, which humanity had spent 3 years learning to ride. "Get some rest, technician," Dale said. "We've got a long trip home." He was almost at the door when Webb spoke again. "Commander, are we going to use them again, the anchors?" Dale stopped. He thought about General Holt. He thought about Frank's equations and Roy's targeting solutions and the 42 probes in the inventory and the 6 ships named for dams. "Yes," he said. "We are good," Webb said and closed his eyes. The Relentless and her fleet released their voidlock in a carefully sequenced withdrawal, each ship peeling away from the anchor point in reverse order of their entry, the dampeners cycling down, the engines spinning up to carry them out of the crush zone on a controlled departure vector. The gravity anchor fell behind them, shrinking on the sensors, growing smaller against the background of the stars. It would still be there when they were gone. It would be there for 1,000,000 years. The universe's most powerful natural force, operating on a timescale that made civilizations look like sparks. But now it had a new entry in the galactic database, tactical asset, human-operated. Do not engage. The Relentless made port at Earth Station Meridian 6 weeks later. The crew disembarked to the quiet efficiency of a military homecoming. Medical teams for the injured, logistics teams for the damaged ships. Intelligence officers who needed full debrief sessions, with everyone from Dale down to the junior technicians. There were no crowds, no celebrations. That was not how Strategic Command operated. What had happened at the gravity anchor was classified at the highest level, and the knowledge that it had happened would be managed carefully. Released through channels, and in forms that served the strategic purpose. Dale's debrief with General Holt lasted 4 hours. She listened to everything. The 6-hour Kethvoran War Council, the flanking attempt, the probe deployments, and the 9 chained ships. The repositioning burn and the damage to Fort Peck and Cooley, the release of the chains, the withdrawal. When he finished, she sat across from him for a long moment without speaking. "You released them unconditionally," she said at last. "Yes, General. Vethkara didn't ask you to. He was prepared to negotiate." "I know. So why?" Dale thought about how to say it. "Because the moment we start treating released ships as a bargaining chip," he said, "we change what the anchor chain is. It stops being a demonstration and starts being a hostage mechanism. And then every species in the galaxy starts calculating how to rescue hostages instead of how to avoid becoming one. Holt looked at him. Then she picked up her pen and wrote something on the pad in front of her. "That goes in the doctrine manual," she said, "word for word." She turned the pad around. She had written, "The weapon teaches nothing if the lesson costs too much to receive." The Kethvoran High Command filed a formal protest with the Compact Council 2 weeks ago, she said. They've classified human voidlock capability as a, quote, destabilizing strategic asymmetry. What did the Council say? They acknowledged the concern and tabled it for the next plenary session. She set the pen down. Which is compact diplomatic language, for we have no idea what to do about this. 38 of the 41 member civilizations have filed quiet intelligence requests asking for full sensor data. From the engagement. They want to know exactly what you did and how. And what are we giving them? Enough to understand the capability, nothing on the engineering. A pause. We're also releasing a position statement through the Compact Diplomatic Channel. Standard Military Transparency Protocol. It will describe Voidlock as a defensive adaptation, which it is, and will note that no Kethvoran crew members were harmed and no ships were permanently lost. Which is true. Which is true. Holt agreed. And which will matter more than people expect in the long run. Dale understood what she meant. In galactic politics, as in all politics, the story of a conflict was as important as the conflict itself. The story of the gravity anchor engagement was not a story of human aggression or reckless endangerment. It was a story of a human fleet that had held an impossible defensive position, neutralized a superior attacking force without destroying a single enemy vessel, and then released the captured ships without conditions. It was the story of a civilization that had learned to sit inside the universe's most dangerous force and use it to protect rather than to annihilate. That story would travel. And the way it traveled would shape how the galactic community understood humanity for a generation. What happens next? Dale asked. Holt stood, moved to the large window of her office that looked out over Earth Station Meridian's main docking complex. Below, the Relentless was in her repair berth, hull plates removed for inspection, teams of engineers moving across her surface like careful hands. The other ships of the fleet were in their own berths nearby. They looked from this height, like ships that had been through something, not broken, but worn, marked by an experience that had tested them and found them sufficient. The Compact Council's tabling of the Kethvoran protest buys us 6 months, Holt said. Maybe 8. During that time, every intelligence service in the galaxy is going to be working on the Voidlock problem. They're going to try to replicate the technology. Most of them won't get there. We had 40 years of inertial dampener development before Voidlock became possible, and that's not a gap that closes quickly. But some of them will start making progress. And when they do, we'll know. She turned from the window, and at that point the strategic calculation changes. Right now we have an asymmetric advantage. We can use it for deterrence, for defensive positioning, for the kind of demonstration you just gave Veth Kara. But asymmetric advantages don't last forever, Commander. They last until someone else figures out the asymmetry. A pause. The question of what we do with this capability before that happens, that's what the next phase of the program is about. Dale looked at her steadily. You're talking about expansion. I'm talking about the decision every civilization with a significant military capability eventually has to make. She sat back down. Whether to use that capability to protect what you have or to shape what comes next. A beat. I'm not telling you we've made that decision. I'm telling you the decision is coming. And when it comes, it will be made by people in this building, with input from commanders like you. And it will be the most important strategic decision this species has made since we reached the stars. Dale said nothing for a moment. He looked at the pad on her desk, at the line she had written, "The weapon teaches nothing if the lesson costs too much to receive." "There's a technician on the Hoover," he said. Aaron Webb. 23 years old. Got thrown across a compartment during the repositioning burn. When I visited him in the medical bay, he asked me if we were going to use the anchors again. "What did you say?" I said yes. And he said good and closed his eyes. Dale paused. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't excited. He understood why. A kid from Idaho who grew up hearing stories about rivers and dams. He understood it the same way Frank Weston understood it when he looked at the anchor readings for the first time. He looked at Holt. That's the part that matters, General, not the technology. Not the doctrine. It's that when we look at the most dangerous thing in the universe, our instinct isn't to run. It's to figure out what it's useful for. General Holt looked at him for a long moment. That, she said, is both our greatest strength and the thing that keeps every other species in this galaxy awake at night. She was right, and Dale knew it. The galactic community's fear of humanity was not the simple fear of a strong military or an aggressive foreign policy. It was something deeper and harder to define. The fear that came from watching a species look at a collapsing star and see a dam instead of a death sentence. The fear of an intelligence that did not share the same relationship to danger that every other intelligence in the galaxy had built its civilization upon. Other species survived the universe. Humanity adapted it, and that distinction, small as it sounded, was the widest gulf in the known galaxy. 6 months later, the Compact Council convened its plenary session. The Kethvoran protest was formally acknowledged and formally noted. A resolution was passed, unanimously, calling on all member civilizations to respect established compact military protocols regarding gravity anchor exclusion zones. The resolution named no species. It referenced no specific incident. It was, as compact resolutions often were, a careful diplomatic construction that said everything while committing to nothing. But everyone in the chamber knew what it was about, and everyone in the chamber knew that it would not be the last such resolution. Because humanity had not stopped learning, and the universe had not run out of forces to be understood, and somewhere in the deep space beyond the compact's charted boundaries. There were phenomena that every species had agreed, by implicit consensus, were simply too dangerous to approach. Dale Harris got the briefing packet 3 days after the plenary session. 12 pages, detailed sensor data, coordinates, classification level above top secret. The phenomenon in question was a magnetar, a neutron star with a magnetic field strong enough to strip the atomic structure from matter at a distance of 1,000 kilometers. Every species in the galaxy had a name for magnetars. The Kethvoran called them the Screaming Dead. The Vorthali called them the Fire that cannot be touched. The briefing packet included, at the bottom of page 12, a single handwritten note from General Holt. It read, "Frank Weston's team has been running dampener simulations for 6 months. They think they have something." H. Dale sat back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling of his office for a long time. Then he picked up his pen, flipped to the contact page at the back of the packet, and wrote Frank Weston's name next to the first open meeting slot. Some rivers, he thought, were just waiting to be dammed. And on HFY Endurance Tales, this was only the beginning. If this story kept you anchored from the first word to the last, drop a comment below and tell us what you thought. Share this with someone who needs to hear what humanity is truly capable of. And if you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? The void doesn't pause, neither do we.